Welcome to Commander Central, episode 280, and today we're going to be talking about how we keep the power levels of our own decks in check. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Gentlemen, how's it going this afternoon? How you doing?
Wonderful, I guess.
Chris, you say that so like grumpy old man-ish.
Yeah,
Like,
right,
I'm
exactly.
fine. I'm still alive.
He's
Grass
becoming
grew.
a grumpy old man, I guess, and time has passed. He's getting up there in years.
Wow, Dana, you're going to talk about that, aren't you?
Dana woke up and chose violence, I see.
Like I should be telling anyone they're old. Any exciting weekend plans for anybody as we move into the weekend? I guess by this airs it'll be Monday, but Max, I know you said you're just going to do nothing and like it.
Yes, I took today off just to do nothing, and then I also, it's Food Truck Friday here in Eau Claire, so I plan on doing that for dinner.
Oh, nice. That's a good idea.
That does sound like a good idea.
I busted a couple spokes in my bike yesterday somehow, and I need to take it into the bike shop, so I'm going to do that, I think, this afternoon, because I'm going to get off work a little early, so that's
Dana,
on my schedule. Yeah.
How rough are you on that bike? Did you not just get spokes fixed?
I did.
Like 2 weeks ago?
This is the third time I've had to take it in because I broke a couple spokes. And more than one every time. It's always been like 2 or 3. They actually wound up ordering me because the bike's still under warranty, so they're just replacing the entire tire in case it's like something defective with the tire. And then after that, I don't know what the next step is. But yeah, I'm not as hard. I'm not hard on it. I'm not like jumping curves or anything. So
I just wonder, Dana, this is maybe a little personal, but you are like 6'7", very large guy. Is that bike rated for you type of deal?
It supposedly is. I did get a big bike for that reason, but I mean that probably doesn't help. I'm getting a little slimmer, but I'm not that much slimmer. So yeah, that's probably not helpful either.
Okay, that's because I'm like, how do you break spokes? I mean, are you jamming a whole bunch of reserve list magic cards in there and going
Right.
tick, 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 down the road or something?
All those
do
alpha
that.
islands. Just tick, 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 tick. Makes them go faster.
Couple copies of Aloran, paperclip to my.
He duct tapes lightning bolts to the side because that makes your car go faster if
There
you
we
paint
go.
lightning
Yeah,
bolts on it.
a little bit extra juice. Well, did anybody get any games in that were worth playing this week? I know Chris has been repping some modern stuff, but how about you, Max? You play anything?
I did not play any games this week. Last time I played was last week with EDA Trek, so it's been a while.
I got to have one game that I will just mention the ending because I destroyed all the lands.
What? Huh?
No,
Who are you, and what have you done with Dana?
Now, in my defense, it was with Gideon, Champion of Justice, who's minus 15, exiles all other permanents in play. And
Well, they deserve that then if they let them go that high.
and I was playing against a token deck with my Zero deck, so I was able to roll him up to 12, and the next turn take him up to and no one could get in and hit him because I had enough defense up. Next turn took him up to 24, and then people were able to finally squeak through and hit him a few times. But when it came back around to me, he was still at 17, and I top decked a Teferi's Protection. Because I probably wasn't going to do it because my board state wasn't good enough where I knew I could win, so I wasn't going to necessarily do it, but drawing Teferi's Protection. And then I also had Lapse of Certainty in hand, the mono white counterspell. So I'm like, oh, well, now if I do it, I can just definitely say I'll save all my stuff, and I can't even, I don't even have to worry about a counterspell because I can counterspell a counterspell with Lapse of Certainty. So I popped the Gideon ult and Teferi's Protection myself to safety, and then everyone just scooped because we're like, because I still at that point had, between Gideon and the creatures that didn't die and a couple other planeswalkers, I still had, 10 or 12 power on board, and I was going to kill everyone in probably 2 or 3 turns. There was just no way anyone was coming back from that. So Mass Land Destruction, mono white, I accidentally got there. And I think that might be the first time I've ever actually ulted that Gideon, too.
It's so much fun to do.
And particularly in that case, when you don't lose anything.
Yeah. Oh, that's magical Christmas land if we had to say anything.
So that was, I kind of stumbled into that. But if you're going to mess land destruction, make sure you have a way to turn that around pretty quickly. And in my case, I did. And, it was, and the game had gone on. It was an hour in anyway. So it was just not a big deal. So if you out there in a listener land want to tell us about some fun games you played or talk about what's going on with your bike and how you've managed to break any spokes, how would you go about getting a hold of us, Chris?
You can reach us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You search up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central, and you can find us on CMDRCentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play show, or just joining our community to chat with us and play some virtual EDH.
And speaking of Decks You Play shows, I listened to the one that came out last Thursday, and I was like, at some point I got to the end of the show, I'm like, oh, well, Chris and Max just stopped. They got bored.
We did.
No, we had a little error that got fixed. The show cut off at like the 35-minute-ish mark, but we fixed that pretty quickly. So thanks to our editor Rafael Garcia, who cleaned that up, and that the full show from last Thursday is up and online.
I did like Raf's little comment when we sent him like, I don't know what happened. He's like, what is going on? He's like, this makes no sense to me. He's like, it says the whole file's there, but it's only streaming the like 30-minute mark of it.
I want to say that happened a year or two ago too. We had a weird thing where like it looked like the whole file was there, but the show just cut off. So who knows? That's probably something with the hoster or something. So regardless, we got that fixed.
Yeah, it's all the YouTube's fault. I blame them.
Yeah, exactly.
Skynet.
Well, speaking of Patreon here, I think we have one new patron supporter we're going to shout out.
Yeah, we want to say hello and thank you to Daniel Oni.
Thank you, Dan. We appreciate it. Appreciate the support from you, from all our Patreon supporters, and from all the listeners. Even if the only way you can support us is by clicking that like or upvote button, that means a lot. So thank you to everyone out there. And we haven't done this for a couple months, I don't think. So I think we're going to fire up a couple of giveaways here in August. We have a Ultra Pro Chandra Alt Art playmat from back in War of the Spark. We're going to give that away on Twitter, and I've already scheduled a Twitter post to go out when the show goes live on Monday, so that will be out there. If you like and retweet that, we'll, at the end of the month, have a drawing, and someone who does the like or retweet will win that Chandra playmat. And we have a Heroes of Dominaria board game. This is like a big, heavy Magic board game box that we're going to give away to a random patron supporter at the end of August as well. So if you are a supporter by the end of the month, you'll be eligible for that drawing. And both of those things were sent to us by patron supporter and listener Andrew Nolan. He is a supporter who used to own a card shop that closed about a year ago, and he had these left over in inventory and was generous enough to send them to us to use for giveaways. So thank you very much, Andrew. We really appreciate it. We got a couple of previews yesterday, actually, that snuck out on the Magic Twitch stream they showed for the upcoming Midnight Hunt set from Innistrad this fall. Did either of you two watch any of that and see any of the cards?
All I have to say is a giant, what's a good word for this? So it's a bomb with a big giant letter F in front of it to Wizards saying that Renin 7 is dumb.
That's a real card. What is it? The two modes. One is mulch and one is
spit your hand out. With all your lands.
I forgot what the other one was, but it's a 4-mode Planeswalker card, which seem like they're always very strong.
Yeah, I mean it is 5 mana, so it's not like it's overpowered. But for a 0, just to shoot every land out of your hand, I don't know if it's really going to matter. But that seems a little outrageous.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on.
Non-basics. It doesn't care.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, there is crazy stuff you can do in green once you get to like that 5 or 6 land ramp spot. But on a Planeswalker where you can, do other things then with that same spell on later turns, that's a real deal card. That's going to be serious. I did like a couple of the other ones we got previewed. There was basically a strictly better shock where if you hit the person with the 2 damage, you scry. Shock doesn't see much EDH play, but I do like the fact that they're like tweaking lower power cards versus like just trying to make the best cards even better. This new shock, and I don't remember what the name of it is, probably still isn't going to see play in Commander really, but like that's in much more interesting design space, I think, than like just stapling 15 words onto something and calling it a questing beast. Right? I mean. And remember, like, it has haste and death touch and can't be blocked, and they look good. I always like going to Innistrad anyway. I didn't necessarily enjoy the last set because I didn't love the Eldrazi stuff, but free of that, this just looks like kind of a fun horror themed set. So I'm looking forward to going back to it this fall.
I'm a big fan of the black and white basics.
Yes, those look excellent. Which is interesting because we've had so many like special version of basic lands in the last year or two, but even so, these kind of still stand out. I like them a lot, so I will probably find some deck where I want to run them for sure, I think. Okay, so that we'll touch on all of that stuff a little bit more. I'm sure this set comes out, but yeah, the never-ending preview season is once again in effect. So get ready because Innistrad stuff is coming soon.
Sure is.
So there was a thread on Twitter the last week or so. CAG member Shivan Butt was talking about what he does, what you can do to power down your decks if you want to power them down. And like one of the examples he mentioned was, hey, instead of Counterspell, run Arcane Denial, because people feel way less bad when they get to draw a couple cards off their Counterspell, which I think is a good individual tip. And it just made me then think about what things we do when we want to, maybe not even power down our decks, just like keep the power level in check. When you're like, okay, I have too many strong decks and I need to make sure this one is a little bit weaker in case I need to play it against some people. Or you just, in my case, I like to tweak my decks. So if I don't have some way to keep them in power, I will just tweak them up to like I'll be 8s or 9s if I'm not careful, because I just like tinkering constantly. So I need to have some things I do to keep myself from doing that. So we want to talk about some things that we all do to kind of keep the power level of our decks under control. And I can start with you, Max. What's something you do to a deck or to your decks that you like to constrain to keep the power level at whatever level the deck is supposed to be playing at?
So I like to take the Zach Taylor from Commander Social's point of view on this, is play the best cards, but play at about that 50 to 25% level in your mind. So I'm a poor Magic player, but I have all the best cards.
So that does keep the power level. I mean, so you can jokingly say that, and that is definitely true. But the reality is everyone plays at a different level, and there's some decks are just going to be stronger in someone's hands. It doesn't matter. I mean, to use an extreme example, it doesn't matter how carefully I play. LSV is going to play my decks better than I do, even having not seen them. And that's even true at a local level. There's players in our shop that, like, whenever I see them pilot a deck, they just pilot it really well. They don't make mistakes. And other people, whenever they pilot their deck, it doesn't matter how much they've played that same deck, they do make mistakes. So, like, that's just something, too. It's if you are someone who just isn't intuitively a really, really smooth player, it's maybe less of a big deal because you're just going to screw up enough that your deck does have a power cap.
For sure. I mean, it's funny because Chris always brings up the meme of, like, Homer Simpson trying to stop the nuclear reactor and the whole plant's watching him, like, is he going to screw up? And that's how Chris describes watching me play EDH. Like, I see how he can win, and he's going to screw this up.
Yes, I've seen it numerous times, and I always feel bad, too, because I'm like, I want to tell him how to do this, but I don't at the same time.
Yeah, especially if it's like a 3 or 4 card interaction or something, because it's like, oh, I can see it, and you're like, he has no idea it's on board.
Yep.
And it's happened to me before, too, with you, Chris. You've seen that on my board before, too, and I'm like, I think there's something here. And you're like, yeah, I can see it.
You Commander players, I don't understand y'all.
So how about you, Chris? What's something you do to keep things a little bit tweaked?
The thing I like to do in my decks, per se, like, I like to do multiple colors in decks, which also, that already lowers the power level of it. When you're running 3 to 5 colors, that just kind of lowers it because you have to be so intensive on your mana selection. The other thing I like to do is I like to raise the pip count on my cards. So, like, in like my Rakdos deck, I have, like, a few cards that are, like, double black or double red or triple red or something like that. So that's really puts a constraint on how many spells per turn you can cast, so you're not going overboard with it. That's the first thing that really popped in my head with that, aside from, your basic other stuff that I know you're going to talk about, Dana.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good one. It limits what you can do in one turn in a couple ways. First of all, those if a card's going to have multiple pips in the casting cost, it tends to be more mana just in general. It's going to be a 3, 4, 5, 6 mana spell, if not more sometimes. So it limits how much you can cast just because it uses a bunch of mana. And then when it uses a bunch of one color, it really makes it difficult to cast multiple spells too. I'm not doing that intentionally in my Sphinx Tribal deck. It's like I'm not trying to run a bunch of things that have double or triple or quadruple blue, but it just so happens that a bunch of Sphinxes work that way.
You just don't have a choice.
Right. But it also means, like, there's just a hard cap in that deck on how much stuff I can do in one turn, because I'm like, okay, if I cast this one Sphinx, that's going to use 3 blue, and if I want to keep a counter spell up to keep that safe, I'm going to need 1 or 2 more blue there as well. So I guess I can't cast more blue spells this turn. I cast 1 Sphinx, and then I'm going to sit here and keep that counter mana up, and that's it. That's just how the deck works. That's not an intentional thing, but, like, you can also do that if you want to run stuff with more pips. You can make it so you have to make hard choices for sure. The first one that pops into me is probably with my commander selection. I tend to avoid the really popular, powerful commanders, and there's a couple reasons for it. Number one, it's more satisfying for me to find something that's a little more obscure. There's probably 3 or 4 different lands matters or landfall commanders that are excellent compared to Mina and Den. But I like playing Mina and Den because it means I have to like rely on the deck more than relying on the commander to do a lot of work. If your commander does a lot of work and it's right there in the command zone, like it usually is unless someone steals it, that just makes it a lot easier to have something really, really strong and play and activate your game plan, which is good if you are trying to, play at a certain power level that's higher, or if you're pushing your game in that direction. If you're trying to keep your power level in check, having something a little bit weaker in the command zone keeps that in check to a degree because you don't have automatic access to something really, really strong. So I do it for a couple of reasons. I do like the fact that it makes me feel like I have to work to get a win, and that's much more satisfying to me. If I have a Golos or a Korvald or a Muldrotha or a Chulane in the command zone, it doesn't make me feel like I had to work to earn that victory. I feel like the commander just automatically did it. And I don't want to make anyone feel bad who plays any of those commanders or something. Like, I'm not judging you for doing so. I'm just saying, for me personally, if I had those as my commander, I wouldn't feel like I did the work in a way that I want to feel like I did the work. So the fact that I look at decks that way and look at commanders that way just naturally keeps things in check for me. When I go to build a commander deck, if I'm looking at commanders that just tend to be less powerful and more obscure because I want to feel like I had to put in the work to get the win, then my power level is naturally kind of capped. There are some exceptions. Reki History Kamigawa, for example, doesn't see a ton of play. He's not a super popular commander. It's a really strong commander. People just don't quite realize it. So there are some examples. I'm not choosing Bartle Runax or something like some vanilla legend from back in the Legends that does nothing. I'm still picking commanders that do things, but I'm picking ones for the most part that require me to make it happen more so than the commander just automatically making it happen. How much does that come into play for you two when you make the choice? Like, when you're looking at a commander, if it's super strong and powerful, do you care, or do you like picking things that are a little bit more off the beaten path as well?
I think I try to avoid the popular ones. I mean, I've always kind of done that when, before COVID and stuff. Power level though, I don't think that matters after a certain point of time. Korvald is always going to be strong, and we might never see something better than Korvald, but
sure,
for all we know, in 5 years from now, Korvald might not be the most played Jund commander, or wherever he is currently ranked right now. For all we know, his popularity itself could just go away, and so you don't see it as often.
I mean, it wasn't very many years back. I saw Prosh decks constantly. I have not seen someone play Prosh in Commander in, 18 months or more, maybe.
That's why Korvald's around.
Yeah, sure, I guess. Maybe those decks all became Korvald decks. Yeah, it could be. But they're right. So something else could come out and replace that Korvald too. Who knows? How about you, Chris? Do you pay attention to that at all when you build a deck, or do you just build what you want to build?
I usually just build what I want to build. It really takes a lot for me to push into wanting to build a certain commander.
Sure.
Now, if you notice something, Dana, out of the 4 that you mentioned, 3 of the 4 contain green and blue. And that color combination right there, I tend to avoid altogether. Aside from my Kenrith deck, which is 5-color angels, that has green, blue, but
sure.
5-color angels. Well, I'm dropping 5 drops and all that stuff. So if you can't come out and whoop my butt before that happens, then I guess that's on you in that general regard. So I try to just avoid those commanders that just seem over the top. They do way too much by themselves that don't really need a support package to keep them, going per se.
And you are the one amongst us who plays a competitive format too. So
yes.
When you want to get that out of your system and just play super strong stuff, you have Modern to do that. So it's probably even less tempting in Commander than it is for other people because you have an outlet for that.
Yeah, well, that's also, I'm not going to knock anybody for building that big deck.
No, for sure.
That super powerful deck, but if you want to take that out and pub stomp on people, it's just not a fun game overall. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, so you prefer to do your stomping of faces in Modern?
Well, yeah, because you get prizes out of it, and it's a 1v1 format, and everyone's on the same mindset of it's do or die. It's not we're coming to play and have fun.
All right, Max, let's go back to you. What else do you have for ways you keep things in check?
I try not to play all the cards you would typically see in an archetype. So when I think about my Regna and Krav deck, I run Dictate to Erebos but I
Mhm.
don't run Grave Pact. I don't run the Fleshbag Marauder, the 4 variants of that to trigger that type of combo. Yeah, I run Blood Bond, but it's a life gain deck, and it's kind of what I'm known for, is to play that
Sure.
combo. It's more of a meme than anything, but like I try not to, if I'm going to run Dictate Erebos, that's all I'm going to run. Yeah, I have sack outlets, but I don't have those cards that drop and start the loop. I try to avoid those. Same for Brago. I run a lot of fast mana in that deck. I have everything but a Mana Crypt in there, but I don't run all the creature tutors that I could abuse with Brago to go get them all out of my deck. I think the only way I can actually tutor for an artifact in that deck is with an Enlightened Tutor, and that's it.
One thing, though, we should clarify. So you said you run all the fast mana. That's not really true. You don't have like a Mox Diamond in there. You're not running like a Chrome Mox, I don't think. You're not running like
True,
Lotus
no.
Petal. I think, what do you have? You have a Mana Vault, I think.
I have
Or
a
And-
Monolith.
Vault, Grim Monolith, Soul Ring, Basalt Monolith, but I do have a Mana Crypt I could put in this deck. It's just
Sure.
in another deck.
There's no Jeweled Lotus, though. There's no
Right.
like
No.
yeah. So you are running some fast mana, but you're not running like that full suite of like the super 8 or 10 powerful ones you see at a CDH deck. You're running 3 or 4 of those things.
Correct.
And they tend to be ones that are good to blink, too. You're not running Jeweled Lotus in there because you're not trying to race ahead. You're running Basalt Monolith and Grim Monolith because they're ones that you can blink and get extra value out of, and it kind of ties in with your theme a little bit, too.
Right, and I mean, because Jeweled Lotus you have to sacrifice, I don't really have ways to get things out of my graveyard in this deck.
Yeah.
Short of the Archaeo Mender and Sun Titan, I think.
Whereas there's some power levels where you don't care, CEDH or the level probably right below that too. Speed is just way more important, and you need to get things out with a Jeweled Lotus a little bit faster. And if you can't blink it, who cares? Like that's not the point. The point is you need to get the speed, and so that's not what you're worried about. You're trying to keep things like a little bit below, a notch below that, basically.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very similar spot for me. I don't have a Mana Crypt in any deck. I don't have a Mana Vault or a Mox Diamond currently in any of my decks. The strongest suite of rocks I have is in my Edric's Spymaster Atrest deck. There's a Jeweled Lotus in there, and there's a Chrome Mox and a Lotus Petal, I think are the 3. That's a deck that plays out like a 8 to 9 power level, and I have a couple of those super fast rocks in there because that deck wants to race out a little bit, but like I don't even have the full suite in there. I have a couple of random ones in decks for reasons. I have a Grim Monolith in my Vela deck because I had one, and Ryan Penneth wanted to alter a Grim Monolith, so I got it altered and I run it in that deck. I have a Mox Opal and 2 artifact heavy decks I have because it's just kind of on theme. My Reki deck has a Mox Amber in it and an Opal because they're both legendary, so like they're just spells I can drop to cost me nothing and draw a card. There's only, I want to say, 5 artifacts in that Reki deck, so Mox Opal doesn't even work half the time. It's just a free cantrip, but that's good enough, So like things like that, like I run a couple of them, but like, the most is 3 of those super high-end mana rocks, and that's in my highest end deck. And after that, that's really it, other than maybe 1 or 2 here or there. So that's definitely something I do to keep it in check. And Chris probably runs less than both of us. I've very rarely seen Chris cast anything but a Soul Ring in terms of like a real high-end mana rock.
I think I have 1 Mana Vault, and that's in Mogus, I think. And I don't even know if it's in there anymore, to be honest with you. I'm like really thinking hard now to see if I don't even remember if it's still in there. I know I've sold like all of them off because I had no use for them.
And you're not even doing anything like untap shenanigans with that for infinite mana or anything. It's essentially like you would probably be just as well served with Dark Ritual in that deck.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, because there's a lot of times that it sits there tapped and just keeps shooting me for 1. And
Right,
I'm like,
yeah.
That was probably a worthless play right there.
Yeah, no, I get it for sure. Yeah, that's a good way to keep the power down too. Like just speed in general. I mean, it's generally mana rocks, but like just speed overall. There's Max. Your strongest deck, I would say, is probably Brago, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, Brago or Tuvasa, but I think they're powerful in different ways. So yeah, we'll go with Brago.
But I don't think Brago's not a fast deck
No.
at all. I mean,
Oh,
it's
it
not
can-
like
it
slow,
can be.
but yeah, and I've seen it kick. Like any deck can kick off once in a while, but like for the most part, like I can't think of a time when Max has won a game with that deck faster than turn 8 or 9 at the fastest. It's probably more than that most of the time.
That is typically how that game goes. I can have an explosive beginning, but then I kind of dirtle. It's a dirtly deck. This deck is going to make games go an hour, 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But I make sure everybody's okay with that before I just be like, hey, everybody, welcome to the shop. I'm playing Brago. Hold on tight, It's more of a, do you have enough time to do
Hold
this?
on tight.
Well, another one, we talked about things that you tend to see in CEDH, like those real fast rocks. Since we're kind of on that subject, you see a lot of tutors in that format. And tutors let you find that one piece that's going to win the game. If you are playing a deck with a Thassa's Oracle, let's say you'll get the Tainted Pact, so you can just name a card you don't have and roll down your entire library and win the game. Tutors make that way easier. They just make life easier in general. You can always find a silver bullet or whatever. As a result, I tend to not run many tutors. Again, the deck I think that has the most is that Edric deck. There's, I think, 3 or 4 in there because it's playing at that power level. Beyond that, I've pulled most of my tutors from my decks. I think there's 2 in my Glissa deck because they're just ones I've had in there forever. But beyond that, I have a bunch of decks with no tutors at this point, or at least no, like, yes, I'm running a fetch land or something, things like that, a cultivate. But I've got no, enlightened tutors really in decks anymore. I think I have 1 demonic tutor in a deck. I don't think I have any green tutors anymore in any of my decks. I don't think I'm running any of the blue ones in any of my decks either. I've just pulled most of those out of my decks.
Not me.
Yeah,
You saw
me
yours,
either.
Chris?
No, I play 4 in Mogus.
Okay.
No, 3 in Mogus. See, demonic, vampiric, the new 3-mana one. That was a reprint in Core Set 20.
Grim tutor?
Yep. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it in Mogus. But then Alesha, I think I have 5 in that one. But a lot of those are like Imperial Recruiter, the other Recruiter, that kind of stuff, because of the simple fact that deck runs off of creatures that have to have power 2 or less.
Sure.
So those creatures are already super weak, so I need all the advantage I can get to get them out faster, to get their abilities kicking off, to do anything with them.
Well, and I will note, even in those decks, though, where you have multiple tutors, it's not like you have a card that you can go get to win the game with them. You're just going to go grab whatever the most useful creature is right now. They're almost like a wild card. This demonic tutor says, go get whatever the most useful creature is right now. It's never go get this piece that wins the game.
No, because I don't play those like combo pieces or anything. Usually, like my tutors, I usually sit on them unless I absolutely need to cast them for a land or something, but I'll sit on them until I need a reaction of some sort to go get something.
I need a board wipe bad right now or we're all going to die next turn to Max's Brago deck.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's...
Why me? Why me?
Yeah, Max. So how about you, Max? What's your tutor situation look like nowadays?
I run tutors, so I'm looking at most of my deck list right now. Brago has 2, it has an Enlightened and a Mythical tutor. Dromoka doesn't have any outside of like the Cultivate type tutors. Regnikrov has 3, it has a Vampiric tutor, an Enlightened tutor, and a Demonic tutor. And then Tuvasa has 2 with Enlightened and the one Idyllic tutor.
Okay.
I like Chris, Regnikrov, I have the Blood Bond combo in there, so I do have cards I could go tutor up and win the game, so, hypothetically. But I'm more like Chris. I go find a solution or something to protect my board state. Like, I'll go tutor up a Teferi's Protection if I know, someone has a board wipe in their hand. In Tuvasa, I'm typically tutoring up something that's going to give her hexproof or unblockable just so I can get the damage through more than, let's go tutor up Finest Hour even though I don't have enough damage on board to win the game type of thing.
Well, interestingly enough, I will quick throw this out there because it just popped in my head as you were talking, Max. I am positive the last 2 times, it might be the last 3 times because it's happened multiple times recently, when I've cast a tutor in my Glissa deck, I've gone to get the same card, Heroic Intervention.
Yep.
And not because I had some like crazy plan to, do something with it. It was like, I have a few mana free here and I have a pretty good board state and everyone's staring at me. I'm just going to go get some protection just in case someone casts a board wipe. Like that's the kind of thing, even the few that I still have, I tend to use them for that kind of thing as well.
I can say I do that 90% of the time in Mogus too. When I tutor, I'm either going for Ensnaring Bridge or the 4-mana 1/4 creature that only allows 1 creature to block 1 creature to attack each turn, just for protection purposes.
Sure. Well, and Chris, I know we've both done this where you like it's turn 2 and you're like, I'm gonna go grab Phyrexian Arena and cast it on turn 3.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, I've done that plenty of times before too. Yeah. So in Max, you mentioned this, I guess, talking about your Blood Bond combo. I don't really play combos, and not only do I not play combos, I tend to not play cards that are the obvious tutor target. To use a couple examples here, I remember when Torment of Hailfire was first spoiled, I was like, how is everyone not freaking out? This card is insane. And it is insane. Like, you don't need to put 15 mana into Torment of Hellfire. If you cast it where X is like 5 or 6, people just usually can't bounce back from that. Like, if you get to turn 6 or 7 with Torment of Hellfire in hand, you're probably going to never lose that game because everyone's going to be so far behind they can't catch back up. Therefore, if you're playing Black and you have a tutor, Torment of Hellfire is almost always, unless you're playing an even better combo than that. But like, if you have Torment in your deck, for example, it's almost always worth getting unless there's something even more powerful. And to use a specific example from one of my decks, I was running Rider Replication in my Veil of the Nightclad deck for a while, and when you kick Rider Replication, it makes 5 copies of a thing. The way Velo works, when a creature leaves the battlefield, it deals a damage to all your opponents. So if I kick Rider Replication onto Vela, it makes 5 copies. They all die immediately because of the legendary rule, but they all see each other die. So it deals 6 times 5 damage to all your opponents, so it deals 30 damage to everybody. If I have a tutor in hand and Vela's out, Rider Replication is the only... Anything else is dumb to go get. And if I don't go get it, then I feel like I'm not maybe respecting my opponents. Like, I'm toying with them or something if I don't go get the way to win the game when it's right there. So instead, I just quit running it. For me, it just made more sense to just not run that card because it was the obvious tutor target every single time. And that's one of my decks I still have, I think, 1 tutor in as a silver bullet. It's nice to go get an answer or something. So given a choice, I chose to just not run the card that I should probably get every single time. Now, you have your Blood Bond combo, Max, but like, aside from that, you don't run many things where it's like, if I go get this, go get this one card, I win the game. You don't run many of those effects.
No, I mean, you were speaking to Torment of Hellfire. That's also in the deck, but again, I don't go tutor it up. Like, sure. I don't go and say, like, oh, it's turn 5 and I can make 8 mana, let's go tutor up Torment and ruin everybody's game. No, I go tutor maybe something like Elspeth Sun's Champion or something instead. Yeah, I don't have any true game-winning instant cards except for Blood Bond, essentially, in any of my decks. Even with, like, Brago, the combos that are in there, I mean, take a lot of pieces. It's like a Strip Mine, Sun Titan lock, or a Archaeomancer, Cyclonic Rift type lock. Like, they're more locks than combos, which is, again, kind of isn't fun, but it's, all brought up during Rule 0.
Sure. Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes a big difference too. And when, again, I'll stress this, we're not saying that people need to run low power decks. We're just talking about like what we personally do because we want to, I at least try to have a spread of decks. I try to have my Edric deck could probably play close to CDH level. My Reki deck plays, a notch below that. And then I have a couple decks that like run all the way down to, I wouldn't feel bad playing my Adriana deck against a Precon. So I try to keep those things spread out a little bit, and this is a way to keep the power level of your deck spread out if you want to. That's all we're saying. If you're someone who wants to play at that competitive level or play at that like 8 or 9 level with all your decks, that's absolutely cool. Do what you want to do as long as you guys have all Rule 0'd that and everyone knows they're on the same page. Any other things from you, Chris, that you do to kind of keep things pegged down to whatever power level you want to play that deck at?
There's a lot of things.
Okay.
So let's take tribal, for instance. A lot of people build tribal decks, and they pick a really powerful tribe. I built a wonderful tribal deck, and I call this deck Arachnophobia, because it's tribal spiders, and it is a horrendous deck. It sucks so bad. It's bad. Really bad deck. But I picked this tribe because spiders are super weak. Like, I think I have 2 super powerful cards. I have, Triumph of the Hordes and whatever that 8 mana rock is that are in there. And those are probably the 2 most powerful cards in my deck. So, I mean, you can take that in for, instance as to how powerful the deck is. And I kept it that way. In order to keep it detuned, I didn't add in, your overrun effects. I didn't add in all, other super powerful things like the tribal effects to make, like all spiders get +1/+1 for each other spider with coat of arms or something like that. Just to keep that in check so it's not overpowered.
Yeah, that's definitely something that, like, if you are building a relatively obscure tribe, you're just going to have a cap too. And not just because there's less cards, but like there's less things that interact with those cards. If you build an elf deck or a merfolk deck or a goblin deck, not only is there a gazillion of those individual creature cards, there's a bunch of support things that do things based on the amount of those you have in play. There's like an enchantment in green that lets you tap a land for mana equal to the number of elves you control. it's easy to get a gazillion elves out, and then you tap for a gazillion more mana. Like, that's really powerful. If you are playing Avatar Tribal or something along those lines.
Oh boy, Avatar.
Yeah, or like playing
Corona the False God.
Right. Or playing or playing kobolds or something, whatever it winds up being, playing crab tribal. You do not have any of those cards to support it, besides just playing a bunch of creatures of the same type. Like that's what you have. So that definitely is something too, for sure. If you're looking to keep things under control and you want to play a tribe deck, that caps it in a couple ways. You're trying to cap yourself to just that creature type, and you're capped because the tribe just doesn't really probably have a ton of support. Max, do you have a tribal deck right now? You've built them in the past, I think, but I don't think you have one currently.
No, I do not. I think the closest I would get would be like Sai, because all he does is spit out Thopters.
Sure, okay.
But no,
And
I don't have
not a broken tribe.
No, I don't have a true tribal deck. Like, I was going to build elves, and then that kind of got popular, so I just backed off.
Oh, the black-green one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that for a while. Well, let's find a good obscure one for you to put together, Max.
There we go.
So what else do you have, Chris?
There's just so many things in general. We talked about fast mana. We talked about another good thing, I guess, that you could do, and I've been doing this quite a bit in my decks, is I don't run the amazing land base in general. I don't have all the duels. I don't have all the fetches in there to go for my duels. I have obscure random, like in Mogus, I'm playing Guildgate still. Just because I can to, make that a little bit weaker, because it has to come into play tapped. Yes, I get both colors, but I have to take that turn off to play that land. So that really drops the power level of what I'm doing, because it takes me until turn 5 or 6 before I start building up.
No, for sure. The land-based thing is a real big one, particularly the more colors you have in your deck. I think it's probably less of a deal or at least it's more a quality of life thing at like the one or two color decks particular. You can get away with running all basics basically in a 2-color deck, I think, and it'll probably be okay. But that makes a massive difference when you get up to three color decks, especially, and then obviously 4 and 5 was even crazier there. But like even at 3 colors, that definitely makes a big difference in how fast and how effective your deck is based on what your land base is. And if you aren't running that perfect mana base at that point, your deck is just going to be slower and less efficient for sure.
Yeah, because I know, like, in my Kenrith deck, I think I have all of the new snow dual lands from Kaldheim that you can tutor, but they come into play tapped.
Yeah.
Like, you can't untap them unless you have the 1-mana rock that untaps non-basic lands and come into play tapped or whatever.
Amulet of Vigor, I believe.
Yep. Without that, you're not untapping them, so they just come into play tapped, which is what I like. I mean, I like that little slow build-up gameplay. It's kind of deceiving to a lot of players, too, because they're like, oh, well, he's just playing all these tapped lands. He ain't got a whole lot. And then all of a sudden it's like, wham, blam, thank you, ma'am. What's up? I'm here to play.
How about you, Max? What else do you have here that you yourself do?
I think playing color combinations I'm not familiar with is a way to power myself down. So on top of just not being a great player in general, like when I eventually build my Dimir deck, I'm probably going to run a bunch of good cards, but I don't know how that color pair plays. Like, is it supposed to be fast? Is it supposed to be slow? Like, what am I doing? And I definitely think that is a way to kind of power down your decks, is play colors you don't typically play.
That definitely makes a difference. And I think some combos are just weaker than others too. Like, it's pretty easy to build a Simic deck that's strong. It's much harder to build a random Boros deck that's nearly as effortlessly powerful, I should say. There's also that, like, there's playing with things that aren't familiar to you, but there's also playing with things that are just generally a less powerful combination, or at least it's more difficult to make them powerful.
Right.
Another one I tend to do is I tend to have some kind of a rule in most of my decks that I build. Some are pretty obvious. My Glissa deck, I have only Death House creatures. Like, that's going to cap the power right there, to a degree at least. There are cards that are great in Glissa that I'm not running. Sylvok Replica is a creature that you can sacrifice to destroy an artifact or enchantment. It's basically like a Rex Sage, but it's on when it dies instead of when it comes into play. But it's an artifact creature. It's super easy to recur with Glissa. That would be great in that deck. Solemn Simulacrum is, useful at any point in time, but like in a deck where I can bring it back whenever it dies, it's that much better. But I've decided to only play Death Touch creatures in that deck, so there's some form of power cap on what I can do with that. Because of the way Glissa works and the way she recurs artifacts, I've made the choice to not run any land ramp in that deck that isn't artifact based. So I can run things like Wayfarer's Bauble, put a land into play, and then if I can have a chance to bring that back, I could play it again, or I have Expedition Map that lets me get a land to hand at least. Horizon Spellbomb is in there that lets you go get a land. So I have a few things like that, but they're all artifact based. I'm not running any like Nature's Lore or Cultivator 3 Visits kind of effects in that deck because I just wanted to do something different with it. So that's one of the rules with that deck that's going to keep that ramp in check compared to a green deck where you can just put, 6 or 8 lands into play over the course of 4 or 5 turns. That's not to say there aren't sometimes games where I can cast that Bauble 5 or 6 times. That definitely occurs sometimes, but that's way less frequent than most green decks that just ramp out because they have a gazillion ways to do it and just go grab lands every single turn. My Veil of the Nightclad deck, to use another one, I have capped myself to just colorless artifact creatures in that deck. Now that's part of the strategy. I want to be able to swing with creatures with Intimidate and have them not be blocked. But I would have to have every single creature do that. I could still run a Baleful Strix in that deck. That's a great card. It's an artifact. It's in my colors. Thought Monitor, the new one we got from Modern Horizons 2, where it has affinity for artifacts. So pretty often you're going to be able to cast it for 2 mana, draw 2 cards, and have a 2/2 flyer there that's, recurable as an artifact creature as well. But it's blue, it's not colorless. So I've capped myself there to a degree as well by saying, nope, I am only going to run colorless creatures in this deck. My Enchantress deck, no artifacts, not even a Soul Ring. Yes, there's some added synergy by doing that as well, but Soul Ring, that's going to be good in any deck. There's almost no situation where Soul Ring is not just great to have on at any point in the game, really. And I'm thematically choosing to just not run any artifacts, and that's going to put a bit of a cap on that deck's power as well. So that kind of thing I think makes a difference too. There's ways you can just bake in some restrictions on your decks because there's self-imposed rules you don't want to violate. Is that something you guys mess with at all? You're in your Alesha deck, Chris, do you have any creatures that aren't recurable?
Yes.
Okay, so you do have a couple in there.
The one I'm thinking of right off the top of my head, I haven't looked at the decks. I keep changing around. I know for sure there's an Elesh Norn in there.
Okay.
And the only reason that it's in there is that it is an anthem for my little baby creatures.
Sure,
and
that makes sense.
It's a semi-board wipe for everything else.
Yeah.
For sure.
And it's a great card in general.
And I do believe Sun Titan's in there. So I think those are the only 2 that are in there that do anything along those lines.
How about you, Max? Is that something you pay much attention to in terms of when you build? I think it is a little bit. I've heard you talk about this sometimes.
I think it depends on what I'm trying to do. So Dromoka turned into flying tribal in green-white. So I don't put any creatures in that deck that don't have flying. I used to run a Magus of the Moat because it said the word flying on the card, and Audric Lunarch Marshal gets by because everything else has flying, so it's going to have flying.
Yep.
But otherwise, I would love to run, a Questing Beast or, an Ewit or something just to have some utility, but they don't fly.
Right. Okay, yeah.
Virago, I tend to run stuff that has ETB, that's just kind of a given. Tuvasa is an Enchantress deck where I don't run any artifacts, even though there are some great ones, especially with the newest precon from Adventure in the Realms that did the artifact and enchantments, but I don't run any in that deck. Regnin Krav, I try to keep it to be either the creature has to somehow gain me life or make a token, because that's what that deck kind of revolves around, is gaining life and eating the tokens. But I don't think I'm as strict as you are with your decks, Dana.
Well, but also I would say this, I definitely tinker with my stuff more than you do. So you build decks, and it's not that you don't tweak things, you definitely do, but I mess with my stuff a lot.
Right.
And so for me, that's a way to definitely, you like the theme, and I think I would say in your case, it's less about the power level and more that you just are building that way because that's how the deck feels right for you. Yeah. In my case, I'm intentionally doing it in a lot of decks as a way to keep myself from just tightening those screws too much.
That makes sense.
I think I've went through most of mine. Do you have any more that we haven't talked about here, Chris?
Not really. I mean, it's super easy to detune a deck, in my opinion. Don't go grab that extremely efficient card. See if you can find one that's not as efficient but does the same exact thing.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't have to run every single staple either. So here's a good example of this. I would have a tough time imagining a deck playing blue that wasn't better with Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. I just think if you have access to blue, those are amazing, just ridiculously powerful cards, and they are entirely about card advantage or about pushing you ahead of somebody else. As a result, I have limited myself to one deck running Remora and a Rhystic Study. I have multiple blue decks. Every blue deck will be better with them, but I've just decided that I'm only going to put them in one deck, and that's going to be it. And I have a couple cards I do that with because number one, it keeps things more interesting if you have a diverse pool of cards, but it keeps the power level spread out too. If you're just like, I'm just not going to run these in, more than one deck or in every deck at least. There are some exceptions to that. Like, I don't remotely feel bad about putting Swords to Plowshares in any white deck I run, because it's a relatively cheap card. It's over $1 now. I think I always talk about it like it's still, 30 cents. It's not. I think it's over $1 again. But it's still relatively cheap. Like, I still have multiples from like back when Conspiracy was out, because it was in Conspiracy, I think, and I did enough Conspiracy drafts, and I think it was an uncommon, but it might have been a common, whatever it was. I just have Swords of Plowshares lying around from that still. But Swords of Plowshares isn't winning me a game, right? Like, that's not why a game turns around. It's saving you from losing a game, but it's not winning you a game. If you drop a Rhystic Study or Mystic Remora at the right point, you're going to draw so many cards you're going to win the game.
Yeah.
So, like, just because a card gets played a lot, I'm not saying you shouldn't run it. I'm just saying, like, there are some cards that are so powerful, I'm just choosing to not use them in all of my decks. Are there any specific examples that you guys can think of? The ones where you're like, I'm just choosing not to run that thing, aside from, like, the rocks we talked about?
I don't think so. I think because I have some little bit of a theme in all my decks. Some stuff just doesn't make the cut because they don't fit the theme. Like, I get why Chris runs Elesh Norn in Alesha, because, like you said, it's an Anthem and a pseudo board wipe in some cases.
Well, but there's also a thing like, Max, you have a pretty decent collection of cards, and I don't know if you have, say, a Yawgmoth's Will, for example. But, like, if you wanted to get one, you could trade for one pretty easily. If you wanted to put one in, you have black decks that would probably be better with the Yawgmoth's Will in them. You're just like, guys, it's not a big enough deal for me to go get that card.
Very true.
And that's definitely true of Chris, too. Chris has a crazy collection of cards, and if you wanted to, Chris, you could put probably anything you wanted to in that Alesha deck or that Mogus deck. I'll use Yawg's Will again, because those are both black decks. I'm not sure if you own one, but, like, you could definitely get one because you have the cards, you can make that swap, and you're not doing that either.
No. Yeah, I could definitely put one in Alesha, let's just reanimate everything,
right.
Cast them out of my graveyard and all that. It's just, no, it's not worth it. It takes away from the actual fun of the game of trying to get sequences to go properly. Like, okay, I need to do this to do this to do this. Instead, I'm just casting one card to do everything I want to do. It's just, it doesn't quite work out the way that I want it to, like that.
Well, and to use Yawg's Will for an example, again, that card's also gotten so expensive. I feel bad about playing it against people, because I feel like you're kind of buying a win, quote unquote. Because most people don't have that, or don't have a collection. They could trade cards to get one if they wanted one. I happen to have gotten a couple of them when they were cheap years and years ago, so I have a couple in my collection. But it's also just one of those cards like I just don't even want to play it against folks, not only because it's powerful, because it's gotten expensive enough that this makes me feel like a jerk for playing it. So I've pulled that out of all my decks.
See, that doesn't bother me quite as bad, because I look at the people, and I riffle shuffle my deck. And people are going to yell at me because I riffle shuffle my deck. But I riffle shuffle my deck, and then I'll jam a reserve list card, and they're like, oh my god, did you just shuffle
what are
a
you
deck
doing?
Like that? Yeah, because I have Wheel of Fortune in one of my decks, and they're like, what are you doing? It's like, whatever.
It's made to get played. Yeah. No, I get it for sure. All right, any final thoughts on this from either of you two about keeping the power in check? Is it something you think about a lot, or is it just something you think about after you play a game and you're like, oh, that deck is stronger than I would like, I'm going to tweak it? How much planning goes into this from you guys?
Personally, it's definitely a reactionary thing for me. Like, hey, I built this deck, I've tuned it, let's see how it goes, and it's way more powerful in person than, on Archidect playing against some of my other decks. And I think, it's a good lesson to be able to realize that your deck is too powerful versus being told. Like, if you leave that game, or let's say you play multiple games in a night with that deck just to maybe I got lucky that first game, and you get that same consistent result, and you're able to recognize that yourself without, everybody saying like, hey, can you just not play that deck anymore, is a huge thing to be able to do on your own. I think I'd rather be able to identify and say, hey guys, or hey people, this deck has been performing way better than I thought it would since I just built it. Can I play it one more time? You know, as if you can recognize that and get that out in the open so people aren't, you know, you don't want to be the person that nobody wants to play with just because you built a deck that was way better than you thought.
And that's all you have for decks too. That's sometimes it too. Like, because I've run into those players where they've got 6 decks and they're all at the same high power level, which is not a problem unless you're trying to play with people that aren't at that power level.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So yeah, that was one of the thoughts. I put together my Adriana Boros deck, I don't know, 6 months ago now at this point, maybe even longer than that. Now, I wanted a Boros deck because I just didn't have one. I wanted to put one together. But also that was the thought process there was like I wanted something that had a power cap so I could play with people at lower power and just not have to worry about it. And Boros lends itself to that for the most part, number one. But number two, the commander I chose was going to just be power cap. I just knew that going in. So I was definitely very conscious of that. And I have had some decks, you know, my Reki deck wasn't intended to be strong, but it's gotten stronger. But it's also one that I'm like, okay, I've just accepted the fact that deck's going to play at that power level, and that's what it is. I will not feel bad about making tweaks to that deck versus something like my Glissa deck, for example. It does not play at that power level, and I'm perfectly okay with it playing at the level it's at. I don't need to tweak that to be any stronger. I'll make changes to make it more fun or more interesting, but like I'm not worried about that playing at the same power level my Reki deck is at either. I want to have something that I can play that's in between that Adriana deck and that Reki deck. So yeah, I don't like for the most part worry about it. Number one, I have 13 decks at this point, so I have a pretty good spread. At this point, it's whatever I build because I have most of the things covered. But I think, yeah, I am definitely conscious of making sure I have them covered. Definitely. All right, gentlemen, that was a good conversation. Thanks for sharing the things that you do. All right, we'll be back later this week with another deck tech on Thursday. Until then, that's going to wrap up episode 280 of Commander Central. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitterboards at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him on the Twitterbirds at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back later this week. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.